Hey everyone, ready to dive in? We're tackling a topic that's both fascinating and really important today, access to education. Specifically, we're looking at the challenges African students often face when they're applying to postgraduate programs, all around the world.
It's a conversation that's long overdue.
Absolutely. And we've got a ton of research to dig into, articles, personal stories, the works. But, as I was going through everything, one big question kept coming up in your notes, and it seems like you're really keen on unpacking this. Why are acceptance rates for African students, well, consistently lower than students from other places like India or China?
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure. There's this perception sometimes that if you just, work hard enough, you can achieve anything. But the reality
It's
is,
not always a level playing field.
exactly.
Yeah.
And to really grasp why these disparities exist, we have to look at the systemic factors at play, the historical context. It's about more than just individual effort.
Right. It's about understanding the bigger picture. So let's start with some of those hard numbers, because you sent over a study that kind of made my jaw drop. It said that African students applying to postgraduate programs, they face an average acceptance rate of about 15%. Now compare that to students from India, who are seeing rates as high as 25%. That's a significant gap.
It is, and it's a gap that can't be explained away by simple assumptions.
Like assuming students from certain countries are just, what, better prepared? Come on.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting and a little uncomfortable, to be honest, because when you start to follow the thread, you realize that one of the biggest, most glaring obstacles is often money.
Ah, the elephant in the room, the cost of education. It's like you need to win the lottery sometimes to afford it, especially in places like the U.S.
It's true. You're talking about tuition fees that can range from like $30,000 to a whopping $60,000 per year at some of those big name universities in the States. And hold on, because that's just tuition. We haven't even factored in living expenses, books, travel.
Yeah, the hidden costs of higher education could be a whole other deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. But it's essential to bring it up because when you add it all up, it becomes painfully clear why finances are often the biggest roadblock for African students.
Okay, so we've got all these brilliant minds out there, but the system is essentially saying, show me the money before they even get a foot in the door. It makes you wonder, are scholarships really bridging the gap? Are they enough?
Well, here's the thing about scholarships, right? They exist, which is fantastic, and many organizations are doing phenomenal work to support students. But there are a couple of major snags.
Lay 'em on me.
First, limited availability. There simply aren't enough scholarships to go around for every deserving student. And second, a lack of awareness. Many students aren't even aware of the scholarships that do
It's
exist.
like trying to find a needle in a haystack sometimes.
Right, exactly. And when you look at the numbers, well, they're pretty disheartening. Only about 25% of eligible African students actually end up securing scholarships.
Wait, only 25%? That's alarmingly low. So is it that they're not meeting the criteria, or is there something else going on?
That's where those systemic issues we talked about earlier really come into play.
Yeah.
See, many African nations are still dealing with the legacy of colonialism, which has had a huge impact on their economies. So we have to be mindful of that historical and economic context when we talk about these disparities. It's not as simple as individual families just needing to save more.
It's like saying just pull yourself up by your bootstraps without acknowledging that some people weren't even given boots to begin with.
Exactly. And on top of that, the application process itself can feel like navigating a maze, even for students from, more privileged backgrounds.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Those applications can be a nightmare. I swear some of them are designed to make you want to tear your hair out.
Right. Now imagine tackling that process from thousands of miles away, possibly with limited internet access, and often in a language that's not your first language. That's the reality for many African students.
Oh, well. Yeah, it suddenly feels like a whole different ballgame when you put it like that.
It is, and we haven't even gotten to the cultural aspects, the societal expectations.
Ooh. Okay, now you've got me really intrigued. We've got to unpack that. Tough. But first, a quick break. We'll be right back to dig deeper into the cultural factors that play a role in this whole equation. Stay with us. All right, so before the break, we were starting to get into some of the cultural factors that can create roadblocks for African students. I'm really curious to hear more about this.
Yeah, this is where it gets really nuanced because we're talking about deeply ingrained beliefs and values. For many students, there's simply a lack of awareness about the sheer variety of postgraduate programs that exist internationally. They might not even know what they don't know.
It's like trying to choose a menu when you've never even heard of half the dishes.
Perfect analogy. And then you have the societal aspect. In many African cultures, there's this really strong emphasis on staying local, supporting your community, contributing to your home country, which are, of course, incredibly important values, but
But they can sometimes create pressure to stay close to home, even if there are these amazing opportunities elsewhere.
exactly. So even if a student is aware of international programs, they might be wrestling with cultural expectations, family pressure.
Or even just the fear of the unknown. Leaving everything and everyone you know behind is a big deal.
Absolutely. It's a huge decision, and it's often made even harder by the fact that there's limited support for students who do want to study abroad. Less than 10% of African students report having access to any kind of mentorship or guidance about pursuing international education.
Wow, less than 10%. That's disheartening, to say the least.
It is. And it's something we really need to address because those mentors, those guides, they can be invaluable, especially when you're navigating a system that can feel, well, pretty overwhelming.
It's like having someone who can show you the ropes, help you decode the system.
Exactly. And those connections can make all the difference, not just in terms of practical advice, but also in terms of building confidence, knowing that someone believes in you, that you're not alone in this journey.
Okay, so we've talked about the financial barriers, the complexities of the application process, the cultural factors at play. It can feel, frankly, like a bit of a downer. But on this show, we like to end on a hopeful note. And I know there are solutions out there, things we can do to make a difference.
I'm so glad you said that because I completely agree. It can be easy to get bogged down by the challenges, but there are actually a lot of really concrete steps we can take to create a more equitable playing field.
Give me some hope here. What can we do?
Well, for starters, we've got to address those practical barriers. And I think expanding access to financial aid is absolutely crucial. We were talking about those sky-high tuition fees earlier, right? Increasing the number of scholarships specifically for African postgraduate students and making those scholarships more visible would be a game changer.
It's about making those opportunities more attainable, right?
Yeah.
Not just dangling them out of reach.
Exactly. But it's not just about money. We also need to close that information gap we talked about earlier. Imagine targeted support programs, mentorship initiatives that connect aspiring African students with people who've been there, done that alumni who've successfully navigated the system.
I love that. It's like having a trailblazer to guide you through the wilderness.
Precisely. And we can also harness the power of technology here. Think online resources that demystify the application process, that offer step-by-step guidance on things like visa applications.
Webinars, online Q&A sessions with universities.
Yes. And let's not underestimate the power of representation. Imagine sharing more success stories of African students who are thriving in international programs.
Oh, I love that. Because if you can see it, you can believe it, right?
Exactly. Showcasing those role models, highlighting their achievements, that can inspire the next generation to envision themselves on that same path.
It's about planting those seeds of possibility.
It really is. But it goes beyond just individual success stories. We need a systemic shift in how international institutions approach recruitment and outreach.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What can these institutions do differently? How can they be more proactive?
Well, it starts with recognizing that talent doesn't have borders. Institutions need to be more proactive in building relationships with universities and organizations in Africa, actively creating pipelines for talented students to access their programs.
So instead of waiting for those students to somehow find their way through the maze, they're out there actively seeking them out.
Exactly. And it also means making the application process itself more accessible. This could look like translating application materials into multiple languages, providing clear and culturally sensitive communication, and maybe even considering alternative ways to evaluate merit beyond just standardized test scores.
It's about meeting students where they are, understanding their unique circumstances.
That's exactly it. And I think there's a real opportunity here for institutions to not only be more inclusive, but to also benefit from the incredible diversity and talent that exists within Africa.
It's a win-win, right? Everyone benefits from a more diverse and inclusive learning environment.
Absolutely. It leads to richer discussions, more innovative solutions, a broader perspective on global challenges.
But I have to imagine there are some people listening who might push back on this, who might say, this all sounds great in theory, but what's the return on investment? Why should we pour resources into this?
And that's a valid question. But here's the thing. Investing in education for African students isn't just the right thing to do ethically, it's also the smart thing to do.
Ooh, I was hoping you'd say that. Tell me more. Why is this such a smart investment?
Because we're talking about unlocking a wealth of untapped potential. These are brilliant minds who can contribute to solving some of the world's most pressing challenges. Imagine the innovations, the breakthroughs, the progress we're missing out on.
It's like we're all trying to solve a puzzle, but we're missing some of the pieces.
Exactly. And those missing pieces could hold the key to unlocking solutions we haven't even imagined yet.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners who've been on this journey with us? What's the one thing you want them to remember?
As cliche as it sounds, the most powerful takeaway is that each of us has the power to make a difference. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. Even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Okay, I love that. Break it down for us. What can our listeners do, even if they're not, university presidents or policymakers?
It can be as simple as using their voice. Talk about these issues with friends, family, colleagues. Share this very deep dive with someone who needs to hear it. Raise awareness within your own circles. Even those small actions can plant seeds of change.
I'm a big believer in the power of conversation. Just getting people thinking, talking, questioning. Yeah. That's how change starts.
Exactly. And if you're feeling extra ambitious, why not consider becoming a mentor yourself? Share your experiences, offer guidance, be that supportive presence that can make all the difference in a young person's life.
Mentorship is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's about making that human connection, showing someone that they're not alone.
You got it. And if you're looking for ways to support organizations that are already doing great work in this area, there are so many incredible NGOs, foundations, even individual initiatives out there that are dedicated to expanding educational access for African students.
Even a small donation can make a difference.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps. And I think it all comes back to that idea of investing in a brighter future for everyone, not just a select few.
Beautifully said. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of where they come from or what obstacles they might face.
Yeah, it's a dream, isn't it?
It is. Okay, well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We certainly have.
But you know me, I always like to leave our listeners with something to ponder. So here's a final thought for you to sit with. Imagine a world where talent and potential are the only prerequisites for accessing educational opportunities. No financial barriers, no bureaucratic hurdles, no cultural limitations. What kind of world could we create?
That is a powerful question, and one that I think we all need to be asking ourselves.
Because when we empower individuals through education, we don't just change their lives, we have the potential to change the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's our show for today. A huge thank you to our expert for joining us for this incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation.
It was truly my pleasure.
And to all of you listening, thank you for being a part of this important dialogue. We hope you'll join us next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters. Until then, keep those questions coming and keep fighting for a more equitable and just world. It's amazing to think about the potential impact. But I also know that education isn't a magic bullet, right? There are other systemic issues that need to be addressed alongside these efforts to improve access.
Oh, absolutely. We can't just throw education at complex social and economic problems and expect them to magically disappear.
Exactly. It's not that simple.
Not at all. We've been focusing on education, and rightfully so, but we have to acknowledge that things like political stability, economic opportunity, healthcare access, those things are all intertwined.
It's like those puzzles where all the pieces are different shapes and you have to find the right way to fit them together.
That's a great way to put it, because that's what we're talking about here, a systemic approach. We can't just address one piece of the puzzle in isolation. So true. But even though it's complex, I'm still optimistic, because every conversation like this, every step we take towards creating a more just and equitable world, it matters.
I wholeheartedly agree. Awareness is the first step, and then comes action.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm really inspired by the passion and commitment I'm seeing, especially from young people who are demanding a better future.
Oh, absolutely. They're the ones who are going to inherit this world, so they're not afraid to challenge the status quo and demand better.
They give me so much hope for the future. And this deep dive has really highlighted for me the power of collaboration. We can't do this alone. It's going to take governments, educational institutions, NGOs, individuals, all working together to create meaningful and lasting change.
It's about building those bridges, breaking down those silos, and recognizing that we're all in this together.
Could have said it better myself.
Well, on that note of collective action and shared responsibility, I think it's time to wrap up this incredibly thought-provoking deep dive.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, as have I. It's been such a pleasure picking your brain and diving deep into this topic with you. So a huge thank you to our expert for lending your expertise and insights to this conversation.
It was my pleasure.
And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us for this incredibly important conversation. Remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect. So keep learning, keep questioning, keep challenging the status quo, and let's keep working together to create a world where education is a bridge to opportunity for everyone. Until next time.